All right, so this is a discussion of the license sync. This is a part two. The first portion covered the beginning part of the process, the workflow of basically getting like a license sync activated. And what we'll jump into today will be like actually syncing, the process of syncing, and then transitioning legacy licenses. So let me share my screen here. And we can pick up where we left off. So again, syncing a license, what we're talking about here is kind of the behind the scenes work of what happens after the sync has been activated. My thought was that we would have a scheduled like background task running on a routine basis, and that routine is sort of up for discussion. I was thinking that we would do a daily sync or a daily check-in, but if people have other opinions on how that should work, if it should be more often or less often, we can talk about that. Part of that decision impacts how quickly we will be able to revoke licenses. So if we do like a 2-week check-in or so, like we wouldn't be able to revoke, revoke access for whatever reason for 2 weeks, for up to 2 weeks anyway.
When you say syncing the license, is that two-way, or is that kind of checking with GitLab? Are we still okay? Like, because the thing that I would worry about if we do long gaps would be, I'm coming up on a renewal. I'm like a week away from a renewal. Okay?
Right.
I add 50 users, and then the system somehow, if it hasn't synced, will it not know about those 50 users, and then renewal process, and it will be a problem? Or
yeah, that's a good thought. I mean, that's kind of my worry with having a longer check-in as well. And to talk about the two-way, I mean, really, we were envisioning this as sort of a, I mean, we had talked about it as a two-way, but really, I think the easiest solution would just be a one-way. Like, so the managed, the self-service instance would just check in with GitLab, and we would never be pushing things to the self-managed instance. So, I don't know if you have concerns with that approach, but it makes a lot of things easier from a security perspective.
how would that work for renewals? So I now need a new license.
So, I mean, it could still be, we could still have things checking on the status of that, like as things are approaching. Like if we do a daily one, we could have the this sync task check to see, if a renewal is needed, that sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Part of it, yeah. But like, let's say that we want to get to a world where the renewals are as automated as possible. And let's say that as part of license sync, we, a period of time before the renewal processes, we automatically look at their usage, we generate an invoice, and we send it out to the billing contact. And then they've got 30 days to pay it. And if they don't pay that at 30 days, their license gets shut off. So like that's a use case that I think we should kind of frame what we're thinking around, because from our research, that was kind of the most likely flow that we would need to do. Like we couldn't fully automate, like just charge a card and push a license, because a lot of these larger companies have a kind of approval process with their finance team where they need to get an invoice and go through their process before it gets paid.
Yep.
So we'd want to, I think, automation for us, maybe they have an option to set this, but I think that's probably the first place to start, is just automating delivery of here's what you owe us, and then giving them a window of time in which to pay it. And if it's not paid by that date, then they get shut down. So we kind of need, I think for that, we need the bi-directional sync for us to know, like, you're still good or you're not. Like if we're not pushing anything down to the instance ever, how do we say that this license is not valid and they shouldn't use it? This user got a refund and this license should no longer be valid, or they never paid their renewal, it's no longer valid. Like those different use cases we laid out in the issue.
So yeah, so at least the way I was thinking about it is we still have all the information that we're syncing to to the customer's app from the self-managed instance. So we have all the information that we need from within the customer's app, like the admin panel, to see like the active user count for a particular instance, all the accounts that we need, the overages, and so forth. So we have the information that we need, I think, from the customer's app perspective, that we could always, that they're syncing, let's say, on a daily basis. So we'd have those like accurate as of the last time they synced that day. And if we do need to do anything where we notify the self-managed instance, or like say that the renewal is coming up, we could do that, I guess, from the customer, the customer's app side, but it wouldn't necessarily be communicating directly with the instance. Like I guess it could be like an email or something to the parties, the interested parties, like whoever is the contact. So like if we could do it that way, that's a possibility.
So they would then still need to, let's say, so it sounds like if I'm hearing it correctly, what we're kind of enabling and automating is us to know what's going on with the instance. But from that point on, it's really the same as it is today. They would need to receive a license key manually and paste it in, or enter it in the instance, or how does the new license key, or the thing that says this license key is now valid for another year, how does that get sent to the instance?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of flexibility there as to what we could do. Like we could just augment this rake task that's currently doing the sync to do a check to see if it needs to do a renewal. That's a possibility too. Given a go ahead, James.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, I think that's probably the idea. That daily sync, it could be done more often as well. And what it means is that we can, it will communicate with the customer's app, and then that is the window or the chance for the customer's app to do something with that instance. So it's not proper bidirectional, but it appears to be, because then we can do renewals. We can also do some communications, say if we want to, communicate any changes to the license or anything from our side. I think we can use that sync, to do all of those things and automate them. So we may not need to send any email. We can just do it that way. But what it means is that we may have to wait until the sync happens. And then, again, that can be tweaked. It could be done like one daily, or it could be done more often. But that's just my my thinking. But again, it can be there's other ways of doing it. I think what we're trying to avoid is to have anything that is bidirectional, because then it will cause some trouble. And it's easier if it's just one way, and then we take advantage of the communication from the customer side to issue a response that can have many things there, basically.
Got it. Yeah, and I'm okay with that as an iteration too. I don't think we need to have any kind of like automatic push the license back down. I'm fine with it being one directional and just kind of automating, getting us the information that we need on our side to start. I just would want to make sure we don't end up in a situation where we've like painted ourselves into a corner and we couldn't automate more down the line because of how we decided to take this first path. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think there's no big difference with the bidirectional approach to this one. The only difference is in timings. Like, we can do exactly the same thing. It just means that we're going to have to wait for the sync to actually get the information, instead of the instance from the customer to ping us instead of us sending something to the customer directly, because we don't know if the instance is up. We don't know, the IP address or the whatever from the customer. Is very difficult to guess, and then it just makes things and they need a port as well open, and yeah, it just makes things like very very difficult. So I think, and still, I think even without that, we're going to be able to achieve the same. We're going to be able to automate everything. We can automatically issue a new license and stuff. It just means that it may happen maybe, instead of immediately, it may take a few hours. That's the only difference.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I get it now. So it's going to be, instead of us like going and requesting info from the instance, it'll push it to us in the customer's app every so often. From there, we can decide within the customer's app, do we need to push a message out through like email or something else, or whatever, we can do it from the customer's app, not from this sync mechanism. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah. So we take advantage of that query from the customer's instance that reaches the customer app to then issue a response that can have everything. It can have like the new license that is get renewed. It can have any message that we want to send. Could be, it could be very flexible there.
Cool. All right. Thank you for educating me a bit there.
Cool. So in that renewal flow, it's something we could easily add on, in later iterations as well. This, just getting the rate task in place and gathering the information from the instance is probably a good starting point. And so to talk about that rate task a little more, basically what that request, so it's going from the self-managed instance and making a request to the customer's app. And in that request body, we would have, the counts, like the active user count. These are things that, I was just coming up with, but the most important things are the counts, like active user count and active user count. I was including guests, historical max, current overage, historical max overage, things like that. We could also include things like plan and whether it was a trial and so forth. But some of this we could already get from the license itself. It's just kind of nice to haves. That we
I think it'd be good to get Amanda's opinion. I don't think she's on the call, but on all
okay.
that, she probably has a good set of, from her time doing these manually. Man, I wish we had this information all the time.
Okay. Yeah. Good thought. Good. Okay. Let's see. Anything else? Actually, right. I talked about some of the information could be extracted from the license itself. And I also wondered about like encrypting the body, because like in a way, the customer could, send requests to our endpoint and like hack that a bit, but I don't know if we're like really that concerned about that at this point. Okay, so then obviously if the self-managed instance is making a request with this data, the customer's app needs to receive it and also store it. So I was proposing that we create a new model and table in the customer's app database for license syncs. I was assuming that we would just capture every request that comes through, but there's a concern there about the amount of data that we would be storing. And so one alternative is that we could store each unique sync instead of each one. We lose a little bit of information about, knowing exactly when each sync happened and what was included. So that's a choice we can make while we're implementing it, probably. It's not super important at this time.
I mean, it would just a thing to consider that it would be nice for us long-term, and I don't know if this would have to be then in the customer's portal or where it could be displayed, but having some like graph of changes over their time as a customer. So it would be nice to be able to have like a store each day or each time we sync, so we can say that, this day you were at 20, then you went down to 18, you went up to 23. So that's very clear and transparent to everyone what's happened and when, so that we can have a easy discussion around, what they owe us or don't.
Okay.
I know that that's come up in various requests, you know, from different customers as well, and then from internal folks, just because it's so hard today to explain to someone and walk through what those changes have been, especially if you're like have a really large customer. They'll do proration at times, so they'll try to figure out like when these users were added to do like a sales assisted quote to do a true up for, you know, from the time forward instead of just a full true up. So anything we can do, I think, to improve just our customers and our understanding of the changes when they happened and kind of the history over time, I think will help. So
cool. Yeah, and I think we could do that with either approach. It's just you know, the alternative approach saves some, you know, database like space, disk space, and then really it's just a matter of like weaving that together. So the simple approach, the easy approach would just be to store everything and then deal with it. Okay, so then next, you know, like we were saying, that there would be a new API endpoint for these license syncs. So up to this point, we've talked about two endpoints. So the first one is the activation endpoint, and now this is another one for the syncing. And so basically the request from the managed service instance would need to include that auth token that was created during the activation. So all requests would be kind of secured through that auth token strategy. And each sync at this point, once it's received, the request is received, we would generate a new sync the license key that would include, I mean, mostly the same data as before, but also include, you know, if we wanted to make any changes, say like we wanted to block the customer, we would, you know, make a change at that point. Or if we just wanted to include the data, like this would be our opportunity to basically to send data, like information back to the instance. So that's that was my idea there. And let's see. Yeah, there's still a question here as to whether we make a request to Zora to get the license information or if we just use the existing key. These are implementation details that we can decide later. Yeah, so, and it just basically the response includes this new license key, and that's the important thing. So now that the self-managed instance receives that response, it's going to store that that new license key in the licenses table. And here I kind of had a question as to whether we would save, you know, historical license syncs. Probably not. So I was kind of assuming no for now. So we basically store the new one and then delete the old one from the license table on the self-managed instance.
I think we actually keep dual licenses. So if you check that model, it normally has like a few old ones, but there's just one that is the active one. I think that's what we might do at the moment.
Okay. So yeah,
I don't know if that is useful, but yeah.
Yeah, we may want to keep it just for audit purposes or, you know, historical finance billing type stuff.
Okay.
It's not a huge deal to keep it. It's probably better to, and it's one of those things that like probably bite us in the ass if we don't do it at some point down the line, and we've been like, oh, why didn't we do that?
Yeah, I mean that's fine. I guess you could think of it as like, I mean, there wouldn't be more, if we did like a daily sync, there would be like 365 entries in that table for each time it checked in, that sort of thing, which is not a big deal. And whenever we deactivated the instance, we're deleting those old license syncs, we just wipe all of them instead of wiping one. So I'll make a note of that.
Does the key or anything change from sync to sync?
It would change slightly. Most of it would stay the same, but we would change a few things. So like, let me go back up to the section where we talked about the key. So I was talking about like including these things potentially in the new license key, the sync license key, these attributes. So the type would stay the same. The last sync that would, you know, change from time to time if that's information we want to keep. And probably the most important thing is like if we want to block, basically the way we would revoke a license would be changing the license key. So either that's using the existing block changes attribute that's in there, or if we wanted to have a separate one just for sync, like say the instance didn't sync within the allotted grace period that we want to set, we would update this date time each time. So it kind of gives us flexibility as to like whether we want to revoke a license or not.
Got it. Okay, then I'm not sure if we need to store every single one in that case, but I'll leave that up to you all to decide the approach. I think, yeah, I was thinking more from a customer historical, like, hey, they've been a customer for 2-3 years. There's been 2 or 3 different licenses. They have maybe multiple instances that we want to be able to understand and track and not lose that historical reference. But this sounds different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most of the historical information that we want to look at is going to be stored in the customer's app and probably not on the self-managed instance, but I'm fine either way. It's not a big deal. If we find value in saving them, then that's fine. I don't actually know if the user ever sees those in the table. I mean, I guess the admins might go in there and look at it, but it's not a big deal. But I'll make a note to save them. Okay. And then I had some questions. Let's see here. How long do we allow? Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit last time, I think. And Michael, you and I talked about this offline. How long do we want the license to be out of sync before we disable the license features? So the options will be, we don't do that, which sort of like kind of negates the purposes of revoking a license. Or, you know, like we'd set up a 2-week grace period like we currently have, or, you know, things like that. Part of if we ever did go the route of implementing that manual sync feature, that can kind of impact this decision, because if you think about them being equivalent, the auto sync feature versus the manual sync, if we had the same grace period between the two, it would be kind of a pain for someone to check in every 2 weeks or something to make sure their license is up to date. That doesn't seem very user friendly. So I don't know if that impacts our decision here.
Well, I would think the manual sync would be just basically what it is today, right? Would there be a manual sync? Like I have to every 2 weeks push something up to GitLab, or would we just say like you're on the old model, like because especially if you're someone who's air gapped or closed network, that seems like that would be a nightmare. So I would think both those use cases, like it's basically, in my mind, it's cloud sync, like the fully automated sync, or what we're, the thing that we're building, the primary thing, or what we do today. And I don't see a middle ground needed right away, at least. Okay, so then let me pull this up. It's probably going to be pretty small, but basically these mock-ups that we went through before, this top one workflow we've covered, but there was also mock-ups for basically the air gap situation where you copy an instance ID and go through that whole flow there. So we're talking about basically not implementing this anytime in the short term or potentially long term. It would either be I don't know what that's getting us, really.
I think the only thing it's really getting us is it's more work on the user, but then we would get kind of more information routinely from the instance. Basically, whenever they copy this instance ID, it has kind of baked in information about the user accounts and so forth. So we get all that information that we get automatically above, but it puts the onus on the customer to do that sync for us. Which I think it makes sense to do that when you're coming up on a renewal, like when you're processing the renewal, so we know what your accurate true up numbers are and that side of things. But it sounded like you were going a route where like they would have to do this manually regularly or they're going to get downgraded. Is that what you're saying? That's that's the yeah, that's the route I was going, and it didn't seem too practical to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is a nice like improvement on what we have today to make it easier to do a renewal with the true up, because you can get us the information and not have the risk of like just putting it in wrong and getting an error.
Right. Okay.
But
well, we don't have to focus on that.
Yeah, if we're thinking about iterations, like for me, this one's maybe like a third iteration or even further out. Like,
okay.
Cool. I think we got to focus on solving the main, the 80% case, which is they have internet and cool. they want to try to automate this piece of things, and the rest of it, like we can fall back on what we do today for every other use case if we need to.
All right, sounds great. I think that actually makes this a little easier in that if we did a 2-week grace period or whatever, we don't have to worry about that impacting like manual sync. So that's still, up for debate, I guess.
Yeah, and like this is probably added scope, but for me, there's 2 use cases here. There's they're in good standing and they maybe owe us for a renewal that they haven't paid yet. And that to me is like, okay, continue to have a grace period. And there's a different use case, which is they've got a refund, there's something they're abusing, like we have shut them down. That to me should be immediate versus okay. They are working out with their finance team a payment for us, or they're waiting on budget. So we want to, on our side, maybe even have a way to extend that grace period. Because I think, sales does stuff today where they just send out license keys that they can use for a period of time. And so I think we got to make sure we cover those use cases, and then Amanda and I can talk about, but I see there being 2 separate cases of kind of immediate shutdown versus something else.
Okay. I think we can probably handle both of those because we have ways to block it immediately because there's an existing way to do that. It's just a matter of giving the admin a chance to go in and put in those new details, and then the next time it syncs, it'll pull in those details. So that's probably good enough for now. Let's see, next question. When a customer adds more seats, we kind of touched on this before. How do we sync that the latest license data? Is it instance? Yeah, I think the easiest thing is to wait for the next sync. And if it's daily or more frequent than that, that's probably good enough, I would say, but I don't know if others have opinions on that.
Can we push like, can there be like maybe a automate, like it happens every day automatically, but if they add users, there's like a push so that we always have that accurate count?
Yes, I mean, there's definitely possibilities to do that. Yeah, I mean, there could be some downsides on like, I just don't know like how frequent that would happen. And like, if we would get inundated with syncs all the time, but it's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, or maybe there's some like 10 minutes after a user's been added, it pushes so that like if I'm adding 15 at a time, it's not 15 requests, it waits like, no, there were some added, there's been a period of time where there hasn't been, now do the push, but not wait a full 24 hours. Like I mean, these are edge cases I'm thinking through in my head of like, I add a bunch of people and then do a renewal or something and stuff's out of sync and then we end up with errors again. But, they're edge cases.
Yep, and that can easily be added. It doesn't really impact the work we're doing. It's just like in addition to what we've talked about. Okay, so we aren't showing user count details in the subscription details mock-up.
I was going to say,
yeah.
Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah.
So I was going to say about pushing dies that we may have to somehow cache or batch those things. So we don't have like, I don't know, thousands of instances, and it happens that a few of them are adding or removing users at the same time, and then we got lots of things to sync that. Probably not a big, a big issue, but yeah, just something to take into account. It's probably not very efficient.
Yeah, and if we were to batch these things and like say, wait 10 minutes after the last user was created, implementing that wouldn't be super straightforward, but it's definitely doable, and we can do it if it's important.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be, I don't know, it could be just, yeah, I don't know, part of it depends how often we also sync, like if we do it like once, every hour or something, maybe that's also enough. And also it will give the user a chance of not making mistakes, like, oh, I'm gonna add, I mistakenly added three users when I didn't want to add them, then probably not something we want to charge, if they are only there for like 2 minutes or something like that. If you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can probably think of similar cases as well. I don't think we should be like too strict because, I mean, for how long they're gonna use that? If they were to trick us and say they have some contractors like for the day, then as long as we check it like for every 8 hours, then maybe that's enough. You know what I mean? Because why would they just add some users and then remove them after a few hours or something? It's probably not.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it's similar. We're having similar discussions on the .com side, or no, on this side in terms of the calculations. We had that session with True Blessing, and we're wondering, like, should we go to like a weekly calculation of the max user instead of daily, because people get in this situation where they add 5 today and then realize, oh shoot, I didn't remove anyone, and they do it tomorrow and it's already too late. And like how much value are people really going to get if they're in there for a week? Like, it's not really how the system works, so you're not really going to do that. So I think that's a good point. It's completely contrary to what I had just said, but I think
well, yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons. It can be discussed in a specific issue for implementing this, but I think we should consider that whether it's really worth doing that, and then it will simplify this because maybe we might be able to do just this as part of the sync, like. If we do the sync every 12 hours or something like that, then that might be enough to report, the users. And it could be a random time as well, it doesn't have to be like, so they don't go and remove users and then put them back or something. So yeah, there's a few things that are relatively easy to implement, especially if we don't have to do that, like every time they add users or cache this and do it. If it's part of the sync, or at least for a first iteration, then that would be much easier for us, for engineering to implement that, I think.
Cool. Okay, so jumping into the next question. Yeah, I just had some curiosities about how we want to show basically we don't show user count details in the mockups currently. So do we handle true ups differently? And I was curious what an overage state might look like. These are things we probably just want to discuss, maybe with Tim or with UX.
Yeah, and this I think will be a bit of a moving target too for a while, because we're doing some other work to improve those things outside of this. So I think we'll have to think through, in the first iteration, what changes, if any, there are related to true ups. I'm thinking probably there won't be any in the first iteration, and that it's really going to be, making this information display the user counts that they need for when they do get to a renewal or a true up.
Okay. All right, so the next one is, how long do we sync after the license has expired? Is there any value to syncing afterwards? Basically the idea here is, I wasn't sure if we like block users from being added after the license has expired, but basically like we would have that information. If someone waited.
I was going to say, I guess it depends, because we don't want to obviously check whether, oh, do we have a new license? Do we have a new license like frequently with that sync? We just want to somehow push this from the instance. Like, how do we renew? You know, because we couldn't, because it's not bi-directional. Then we can't just say it's a bit tricky, because then the billing user will go, you know, and renew this eventually, maybe, you know, for another year, but then they will do that through the customer's app, I assume.
Yeah.
But if we can do that or initiate that from the actual instance, then that will mean that we can send some sort of sync, you know, or activate the sync again to see when that license is active. So with the problem we have here, I haven't thought about it yet, is that we may not want to, you know, keep the sync going, but we may have to if we don't have a way to know, you know, when the new license is active. And the problem, even if you do that, is not very good user experience, because say if we do that every 12 hours, you know, we don't want the user to wait 12 hours if they activated the license. You know, we may want to do that straight away. So I think we may need to think about something here, maybe initiate this, or actually have something that triggers the sync, you know, that tells you, so you renew the license, and then if we know that, if we check, you know, the records in the customer's app, and we know that they have the auto sync enabled, then we can tell them, hey, you may have to press this button to do the sync, and then your license becomes active, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I was thinking a button potentially just to activate it again, which would just do the sync immediately.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best option, but I don't know.
My main thought there was just whether we want to continue to get the user information and store it in the customer's app while, you know, a license has expired, at least in a certain amount of time, like a window. If most licenses get renewed within like a week of expiration, I mean, I'm sure most of them get renewed before that, but, you know, there might be a certain time period that we want to keep it.
Yeah, that's an option. I don't know. I guess, so in the worst case scenario, then the user goes and the license expires, and then he's got like more users there or something. But at the time of activating the new license with the old user account, it will probably complain or something, or, you know, the user may not be able to do that somehow, I guess. I don't know. Is that the worst case? Or what are you trying to achieve by keeping the stats in the customer app from the instance?
Mostly just to like have that visibility for any admins that are like, or like managers that are going there and looking at the information for a particular instance. So we have it for the entire life of the license, but as soon as it's expired, then they don't have that information.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably a question for product. I don't know if it's worth, basically. I don't know what was the benefit, but if there's a benefit, we can certainly do it.
We should talk, I think, with Amanda on that one as well. I think we don't count anyone as actually churned until they've like 75 days past renewal. So I assume there are plenty of use cases where people are renewing deep into that, and we've kind of given them a grace period or something because they're going to pay us hundreds of thousands of dollars or something. So I think we need to do a little more research and understanding into the processes here to make that decision. I don't personally have the information right now to be able to make a call on that.
Makes sense.
The last question I had here on this workflow is basically how we want GitLab employees to access this information that we're now storing on the license syncs. I was just imagining something in the admin panel that we would add. You had mentioned a graph that shows how the user counts change over time, or the details in general change over time for a license. So all that is up for discussion, but doesn't have to be discussed right here. I think it's fairly straightforward. It's just a matter of capturing all that the various people need to see. But all the data should be ready to go. So we're up on time with a minute to go. And, we have another section here. This one's a little tricky too. So, it's not worth rushing through it. So we can probably pause here and I'll give a second for anybody to bring up any questions they might have on the things that we've talked about so far.
Not so much questions, but in terms, I know we've got to go through this other section in terms of next steps and what we can start to move on for 12.9. I know you had mentioned you were going to create some issues. Are there things in here that, I know we have some open questions and things to figure out, but are there things in here that we can start moving on for 12.9 that we know what we're going to need regardless of, the decision on this question or this question, that we can get ready and created so that we can get them as part of 12.9 planning?
I mean, I don't think there have been any like red flags so far with either discussion we've had. There's definitely still decisions to be made about, implementation and things like that. But I guess the overall like big picture it's still in play. So I guess I can start creating the issues and we can iron out the details within those issues probably.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome because I would love to maybe 12.9 is we just like proof of concept that we can have an API endpoint in the customer's app and an instance sends information to it every so often. And like we start there. I'd like to go farther than that, but what can we do to just start getting the wheels turning on this project and get some momentum? Because I think it's going to be I don't know what you're thinking now, but I'm assuming it's going to be multiple milestones to get there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's see what we can start doing now so we can get there faster.
Okay. And then as far as talking about this last section, do we want to have another meeting for that? I know we're getting close to the end of this milestone. I was hoping to kind of get through all this and have all the issues created soon. So do we want to, I can set up a meeting for tomorrow morning, the same time as today, if that's useful, or if people just want to look through it themselves, that's also an option. Again, it is useful kind of going through it together, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to go through it together. Selfishly,
Cool.
just for me to make sure I understand everything and we can have these kind of conversations. So I'm
Okay.
I'm cool with tomorrow. I'm cool with this afternoon. I know for folks like James and everyone else on the team, this afternoon is probably tough, but I'm happy to do tomorrow.
Okay.
You might see me like not showered and in gym clothes, but that's fine. Turn my camera on.
That's fine. Okay, I'll get something on the calendar tomorrow morning and we'll wrap up this conversation. Thanks so much to everybody for joining and for the back and forth on everything. I think we're coming to a good consistency on things, and I'll start cranking out some issues here soon.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks so much, Tyler. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Tyler.
I'll talk to you all later. Bye.
See ya.
Later.